Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi and, well, I thought now was a good time to do a post-mortem or an autopsy, if you would, of the recent Murders at Karlov Manor set. So we're going to be talking about the set's impact on constructed environments, particularly from a budget perspective, as well as the limited environment, including exactly how well I did within the format, really laying it bare and letting you see exactly what's going on. And Mark Rosewater recently gave us a peek behind the curtain of what to expect in the, well, nuts and bolts, if you would, of a play booster. And we're going to talk about exactly how that should shape our expectations and decisions within the future limited environments. But before we get into all that, take just a moment to like, comment, and subscribe, because that kind of thing really keeps this boat moving. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. All right, so to start things off, frankly, I have not been shy about my opinion that the particularly draft archetypes presented within this set did not really convert well into constructed archetypes, particularly for budget players in Standard. Instead, what we did get was a relatively short list, and certainly these examples you see on your screen now is not an exhaustive list. And these cards, while they didn't introduce new archetypes in and of themselves, they did a lot of work to revitalize existing archetypes and in many cases kind of drag them up to obscurity to really have a place in the sun, at least for a moment. Now, how much of that will linger and remain forceful within Standard as we go on will remain to be seen. And honestly, I think this is going to be indicative of what we can expect from new sets into this now 3-year Standard. There's going to be very infrequent new archetype introductions, but instead, as budget players, I think we need to be looking at those in particular high impact uncommons, things like Insidious Roots that do a huge boost to an existing archetype and really make the deck far more playable and impactful within the meta. When we look at the limited environment, we see that Murders was a relatively slow format with a little over 9 turns in an average game. That is considerably slower than the majority of the quick draftable sets right now on Arena. And while we always expect that being on the play is advantageous, a little over 2% really feels like quite a lot. But when you look there on the scatter plot, that is actually less than all but 2 of the quick draftable environments on Arena, whereas there are 4 environments that provided even more advantage to being on the play. These are long-term problems within Magic's turn-based environment. They're not going to be easily solved, but it's always interesting to see where a particular environment falls within the spectrum. More concerningly is the 2-color deck archetype performance. 2-color decks performed on average 56.8% win ratio. That's not really that unusual. Honestly, when you look at 17 lands, you expect about 55-56% win rate because people contributing the data there are generally higher performing drafters. What really gets me here is the fact that there are only 3 decks outperforming that average. And yes, Boros is listed as outperforming at 56.8 exactly as the average. Technically, it did outperform, but you had to go to like the 3rd or 4th decimal point before you could even see it. So what we end up with here is 3 2-color archetypes that outperform the average, while you have 6 that underperformed. And technically, you really expect this to be more of a 5 and 5 split, with 5 archetypes being above average, 5 archetypes being below. That's what you expect from information about averages. Even beyond that, if you look at the headspace between the performance of the top performer, the average, and the lowest performer, the Orzhov is outperforming average by 1.5%. Whereas Dimir is underperforming by 1.4%. So even though you have less archetypes outperforming, they are significantly outperforming, more so than the underperforming decks are underperforming. So you really have kind of a landslide slanted environment here. And particularly for us budget drafters, if we spend our early picks acquiring value, which is still what I recommend you do, the likelihood of getting into these outperforming archetypes is even less. So you can expect that for most people in this season, you maybe underperformed your moving average as far as win rates and gem acquisitions and things like that. But how did we do on value? Just to set the stage a little bit before we talk about the actual results, back in the preseason, when I talked about the potential value of drafting with play boosters, I pointed out that the expected rares per pack, if you were to buy packs and open golden packs, is about 1.6 high rarity cards per 1,000 gold spent. And that 1.6 rares, if you would, per pack was not only achievable under this new play boosters, but was potentially pretty likely even to exceed it. So let's see, how well did we actually do? Well, the fact is, I feel like I did pretty darn well. In total, across my 3 accounts, I did a total of 20 drafts, the vast majority of which were quick drafts. And while a 40% win ratio really doesn't sound like much, it actually was my goal going into this year to get at least 2 wins per draft on average. And those kind of numbers put buying the Mastery Pass well within reach. In all, I drafted 150 scarce cards, that being rares, mythics, or things like from the list or special guests and things like that. I also won a total of 28 packs and 4,850 gems. Now, when you really do the math on this, we ended up much higher than that 1.6 rares. In fact, just drafting, we picked up 1.5 rares per 1,000 gold. We also picked up an additional 1.4 packs per draft, which puts us at something like 8.9 total rares on average per draft, or almost 9. So right off the bat, we beat having bought packs and opening golden packs as an option. Not to mention, we end up with about twice as many uncommons compared to someone who spent the same amount of money on packs. But wait, I can hear some of you already saying, but when I buy packs, I earn wild cards by opening those packs. And you're absolutely right. So to be fair, to compare apples to apples, let's take a look at that option as well. All right, so again, starting off with drafting, we are about 10 rares ahead, maybe as many as 12, depending upon how you want to look at the math, and about double the number of uncommons from opening all the packs. And if you were to buy packs instead and spend the exact same amount of money to acquire Murder's packs and the free golden packs, you could acquire 99 Murder's packs and then the golden packs on top of it. So opening your 99 Murder's packs would give you approximately 16.5 rare or mythic wildcards. And although I left this out of the graphic, it would also generate you approximately 6 golden packs. Opening that would yield you one more wild card. The rares from those 99 packs and the 6 golden packs have already been accounted for in our prior conversation. So all in all, you would end up with about 17 and a half high rare wild cards. But to be fair, having drafted, I also have 28 packs that I can open. And while the rares from those packs, again, have been accounted for, they would generate about 4.7 additional wild cards. And I'm generating a lot of gems with that too, which I can then use to buy the Mastery Pass, which will yield me another 20 packs. And that, of course, brings 20 rare or mythic cards with it, plus generates another 3.3 wild cards. And let's not forget that every version of the Mastery Pass comes with 10 mythic ICRs. Some versions of the Mastery Pass can come with as many as 20 rares as well, but not all do, so we're going to leave that out of the conversation. That will yield us approximately 48 total more high rarity cards. And even after paying for the Mastery Pass, I still have about 2,650 gems from this season as an example, which I don't recommend that you do this, but you could use those gems to buy approximately 13 and a quarter packs. There's definitely better things to do with your gems than buy packs. But if you did, of course, that would generate another 13 and a quarter high rarity cards and another 2.2 wild cards, bringing the total for the drafting and opening example to 63 and a half, give or take, compared to the adjusted 17 and a half if you were to just buy packs. That is approximately 15% more high rarity cards each and every season, or a nearly 400% return on your efforts to draft rather than just buying packs. And, well, that's pretty darn good any way you cut it. So everybody say it with me now. Drafting is the best way to add value to your collection, hands down. We've looked at all the options. This is the one. This is the way. In a recent Nuts and Bolts column, Mark Rosewater gave us a bit of a peek behind the curtain as to how the play boosters were being constructed, as well as how that impacted limited environments, particularly for sealed and draft. So let's take a look at some of what Mark had to say and see what we can garner for it as far as expectations moving forward about those draft environments, particularly as budget players, and see how that should be shaping our decision making. One of Mark's main focuses within the article was regarding the rarity shift when we move to play boosters in order to keep limited environments preserved. Primarily the shift of 20 commons up to being now uncommons and how that would impact the way they designed the set. He also went on to say that of those 20 uncommons, each monocolor got approximately 1 on average. 10 of those cards went to multicolor, 1 for each 2-color pair, and that the remaining 5 were generally intended to be colorless, primarily artifacts and lands. As value drafters, a disproportionate number of our picks often go towards grabbing uncommons for the collection. In fact, it's not unusual for me to use half my picks or maybe even more in a given pack towards uncommons. Therefore, the makeup of those uncommons becomes disproportionately important to our community. Mark didn't give us a lot of design aspects as to the functionality of those uncommons, in particular in the non-creature spells, but he did give us very clear indications about creatures versus non-creatures in each color. And if we take a look at that, we see that red and black is pretty much expected to be fairly even on creature versus non-creature distributions. So that's kind of a baseline. We shouldn't necessarily have a hard time picking up creatures as opposed to non-creatures, but with being selective shouldn't be a problem at all. White and green kind of on the top end of the spectrum, both are expected to have more creatures. Green, of course, this makes perfect sense, but it might seem a little odd that white is expected to have more creatures at uncommon than green. That's because a lot of green's creature-based removal will also come at that uncommon level. And also, white is expected to have less creatures at higher rarities and instead be given powerful rares like board wipes and things like that green just isn't expected to have. This is why very often over the last year or so and projecting forward, white and green can be expected to be very safe havens for us as value drafters, ensuring that we get enough creatures to have a playable 23 card deck. Blue, however, is expected to have significantly more non-creatures at uncommon. And that is going to make drafting blue in this set, as well as potentially future sets, maybe a little riskier. You might have a hard time coming up with that 15 to 18 playable creatures for your deck, simply because blue uncommon slots are not offering as many creatures and they're going to dry up much faster. And of course, the uncommon non-creatures can be very hit or miss. It's not like we can expect to really pick up premium removal within blue as opposed to something like black or red. So blue is, well, a lot riskier to try and draft as a value drafter moving forward. As I mentioned earlier, a good portion of those additional uncommons went towards those two-color, multicolor slots. This is generally expected to be good for budget decks because those draft archetypes should more easily translate into powerful archetypes for constructed. However, we didn't really see that this time around. Now, whether that's going to be the rule or the exception remains to be seen, but generally I take these additional gold uncommons as a good sign for us as budget players, and I hope that we continue to see kind of standout uncommons, whether that translates just to making a powerful deck around that card or the archetype at large. As value drafters, we find that we do a lot of flexing and pivoting amongst colors to not only follow the value options that we're given, but of course trying to stay within the open colors as well and making sure that we have a viable playable deck at the end of the drafting process instead of just a pile of value. And the colorless cards at lower rarities then become a very safe haven for us as value drafters that can really be played regardless of what colors we end up with. And Mark was kind enough to give us a pretty good indication on those at both common and uncommon. For commons, we are told to expect a 2, 3, and 4 drop creature, a piece of removal, a mana rock, and something providing land/mana fixing. At uncommon, we were told to expect 4 creatures, 3 to 4 non-creatures, and 2 to 3 lands. And, well, this set was very much a gold set and maybe is not the best indication of what we should expect moving forward. But when we compare those expectations with what we actually got, we got 2 mana creatures, one of which was pretty good. No 3 mana or 4 mana, no removal. We got a mana rock that unfortunately was also very archetypal specific, so it worked much better in certain archetype decks than in others. We did actually get 2 pieces of land fixing at common, one of which was actually pretty good. For uncommons, we got 2 creatures that were both kind of lackluster. We only got 1 non-creature. It was pretty good though, particularly for fixing. And we did get 2 lands. So when we bump these expectations versus reality, we find that we are basically short 3 creatures, a piece of removal, and 2 non-creatures. That's a lot for us as budget players to leave out of the colorless slots, and it makes it much harder to flex in and out of various options. In place of those 6 missing cards, we got a common equipment in Thinking Cap, which once again was very slanted towards a specific archetype and really underperformed in really any other kind of deck. One of the aspects of Murders at Karlov Manor that I talked about in the initial budget perspective video was the overwhelming goldness of this set and how it would likely result in less playables within your sealed or draft pool. And in retrospect, I think if anything, this was even more impactful than I had feared. Overall, the goldness really resulted in far more unplayable cards having been drafted or opened in a sealed pool than any other set that I remember in the arena period of the game. So in summary, I'd have to say that Murders at Karlov Manor was, well, a little mediocre. It didn't really provide good budget deck options. The draft environment was not particularly balanced or very well thought out and constructed, although it did provide excellent draft value. Overall, if someone were to be watching this post-season or late in the season and really haven't delved very much into Murders at Karlov Manor, I would recommend not putting a lot of resources into this. Rather than trying to overall draft the environment, I would look at the individual decks that you want to play and maybe consider just crafting the handful of cards that would be relevant to those decks. A lot of people have been asking me, am I looking forward to Outlaws of Thunder Junction? We've had a lot of spoilers and not very many official previews, and so far I'd have to say you're darn tootin' I am. If nothing else, the bonus sheet that has been already confirmed for this set means that there's going to be even more high-end value available for us in draft. There looks to be some interesting creature types, particularly for plants, to add value to existing formats. And although we haven't seen all of the draft archetypes just yet, what we have seen looks pretty compelling and potentially promising. So yes, I am looking forward to the next set, and I think you should be too. And speaking of added value, my wonderful patrons have made it possible for me to give away 6 packs of March of the Machine in the form of a pre-release code. The only trick here is you got to figure out how these 5 code sequences relate to each other and go in order to claim that. Also, while this code does not say anything specifically about what parts of the world it is redeemable in or not, it is distributed in a pre-release pack. So if your part of the world doesn't receive pre-release packs, this code might not be redeemable for you. Please feel free to do your own research because, well, I don't know the answer. And all I really ask here is that once you have claimed the code or maybe found that someone else already did, comment down below and let everyone know because I don't want folks wasting their time on that. And before we go, I want to take just a moment to thank my totally awesome patrons for supporting me and allowing me to apply my passion into a community. And of course, before we go, I've got some suggestions for your next step.